All right, today we're doing section 6.2. We are going to be multiplying fractions together. So our objective is to multiply algebraic fractions. To warm up, we are going to review what we worked on Friday, which was simplifying algebraic fractions. On number 1, what did we get as our answer? I agree we should have an x in there somewhere. What do we do with exponents when we are dividing the same base?
We don't know.
So we subtract our exponents. We get x to the first. We put it in the denominator because that's where the bigger exponent started. We have to have something in the numerator, so I put a 1 there as a placeholder. On number 2, when we go to simplify this, we have to do one piece at a time. First piece we're going to focus on is the 4 over 12. How does that simplify as a fraction? Jamal? 1/3. So that's part of our answer. Then we simplify the x's. What am I going to do with the exponents? Subtract them. 5 minus 2 is 3. So I need x to the third. Is it going in the top or the bottom? The top, because it had the bigger exponent to begin with. On number 3, we have to be careful about how we do this. There's 2 different ways we can do it. One way would be to say, well, they've got the same base, 3c, 3c, both in parentheses. So what could I do with their exponents? We're dividing the same base. What do we do with the exponents? Subtract, same thing we've been doing. 3 minus 2 is 1. So I would have 3c to the first power. Would it go in the numerator or the denominator? Numerator, because that's where the bigger exponent was. Now, if we wanted to, we could put a 1 in the denominator. But 3c to the first is the same as just 3c. Number 4 is more similar to what we were doing on Friday. What do we need to do to get this started? Do what? Simplify how? In order to be able to simplify this, we have to factor it. So Lexi is correct. To factor it, we will use square roots. So what is the numerator going to factor into? Y minus 4, y plus 4. Can my denominator factor? Can my denominator factor? No, I should hear more than just 1 or 2 little voices saying that. Everybody should be able to tell me that that denominator cannot be factored. So what happens? Kian? The y minus 4s can cancel each other out. So our answer is y plus 4. You can put it over 1. You don't have to. You can put the parentheses. You don't have to. On number 5, what is my first step going to be? Ryan?
Factor the method.
Factor both the top and the bottom with the x method. What goes on the top of my x for the numerator? What about the bottom? What numbers are going to fill in my x? -8 and what? -4. Who can raise their hand and tell me how that helps me factor? We factor the numerator into x minus 8, x minus 4. We still have to factor our denominator. Jeriel, what's going on the top of my x?
Oh, 20.
The bottom?
9. -9, -9.
-9. What numbers are going to fill in my sides?
I don't need none. That's a lot of math.
All right, we've made our x for the denominator to help us factor it. Jamarl, how does that factor then? Thank you. Now that we have it factored, we should be able to simplify. May, what's going to simplify? X minus 4's cancel each other out, so what are we left with? May? X minus 8 over x minus 5. You can put them in parentheses if you want to or need to. Can I cancel out those x's? No, they are part of binomials, so if you need to put your parentheses to remember that, please put them. Do not cancel out x's that are part of binomials. All right, we've got our multiplication rules for fractions. So we need to first fill in the rule. If we have a over b times c over d, the result is a times c over b times d. We multiply straight across the top, straight across the bottom. So for example, off to the side, we have 3/8 times 5/2. What gets multiplied together in my numerator? 3 times 5. What's 3 times 5? 15. In my denominator, what am I multiplying? 8 times 2. What's 8 times 2? Okay, so at the bottom, our note says just multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators. We can reduce first to get smaller numbers. Now you'll notice that on that example they gave us, we could not reduce 3/8 or 5/2 first. We also cannot reduce 15 over 16. So there was no way to reduce on that one to get anything to be smaller. All right, on to our examples. Remember it said to reduce first to get smaller numbers. So we could just go ahead and multiply, but it's going to be better if we get used to reducing first. When we are multiplying fractions together, we could just look at each fraction, 8 over 9, 3 over 10. Individually, those fractions do not simplify. But because we're multiplying 8 times 3 over 9 times 10, they end up being all part of the same fraction. So we can do what you might have heard called cross-canceling or cross-reducing. What numbers can be cross-canceled or cross-reduced?
3 and 9.
3 and 9. What is the 3 going to become?
1.
What's the 9 going to become?
3. Wait, the 9.
I need somebody else to tell me what else can cross-cancel. Danielle, 8 and 10. What does the 8 become?
2.
I mean, yeah, 4.
4. Okay.
Did I say it right?
I couldn't hear you. I didn't hear you say anything. What does the 10 become? Thank you. Questions about cross-canceling or cross-reducing? Okay, so these numbers are still getting multiplied together. 4 times 1 over 3 times 5.
15.
Can that fraction be reduced? No. So we are finished with that problem. Questions about multiplying fractions? Okay, let's try another one. This one has variables involved. Still the same type of problem. So I could write this multiplied together. Okay, I rearranged it a little bit in the denominator, but it still shows that these things are getting multiplied together in the numerator and in the denominator. Lexi, what's one thing that could reduce on this fraction?
6 and 15.
Good. What would the 6 become?
2,
And the 15?
5.
Good. Deshaun, what else can reduce? The y's. So what do we end up with? Y to the first in the top or the bottom? In the bottom. So we'd end up with a y to the first in the bottom. So when we go to write our answer, what's getting multiplied to this 2 in the top? The x. Even though we didn't reduce or cancel anything with the x, it's still there. What's getting multiplied together in the bottom? 5y. Is there anything I can do to simplify this fraction more? No, so that is our final answer. Alright, number 3 is similar to the last one we did. I'm going to start off by rewriting this as one big fraction. So 12yz in my numerator, 15z squared in my denominator. Natalie, what's one thing we can reduce here?
12 and 15.
What does 12 become?
4,
And the 15?
5.
Keon, what's something else we can simplify here?
C.
Okay, what happens with the z's? What do we end up with? Z to what power? Good. Z to the first goes in the denominator. So now that we're done simplifying or reducing, we're going to write our answer. What goes in my numerator? 4y, and in my denominator? 5z. Can anything else here simplify? No. On number 4, before we can start simplifying, there's another step we have to take. What are we going to have to do here that we have not had to do on the last few? Factor. We are going to be factoring. So I'm still going to set up a new big numerator and denominator. But now when I go through these, I want to factor them before I write them down. So let's start with our first numerator. What method do we have to use to factor that? The X method. Jay Sean, what's going on the top of my X? What is it?
12, like 1, 2, 12.
And I'm not saying anything because there's something you're missing?
Oh, negative 12.
Thank you. Negative 12. And what about in the bottom of that X?
X.
We want a number.
Oh, one. Is that right? Negative 1.
Thank you. Danielle, what numbers do I need to fill in the rest of my X? Negative 43. Thank you. Delaney, how do I use that to factor my first numerator? Thank you. All right, so we've got one numerator factored. Now I want to factor my other numerator. What method do I need to factor my other numerator? What is it? Square roots. So Jakeem, what does my other numerator factor into? We factor using square roots, we get x plus 5, x minus 5. Now our numerators are fully factored. We need to look at our denominators. What method am I going to use to factor my first denominator? Not square roots. This is not a perfect square.
Division.
Subtraction.
What are we supposed to check for first?
GCF.
A GCF. What's our GCF?
5.
X. When I factor out an X, what's left over? X minus 5. Can my other denominator be factored?
No.
So what do you think I need to put around it? Thank you. Tariana, what's something that can reduce or cancel?
We on the second problem.
X plus 3s can cancel out. Nevaeh, what's something else that'll cancel out?
X minus 5.
X minus 5s cancel out. Is there anything else that can cancel out? No. So we go to write our answer. Kelby, what goes in my numerator? Franklin, what goes in my denominator? An X. Can I cancel out this X in the denominator with one of these X's in the top?
No.
No. The ones in the top are both part of binomials, so nothing from them can cancel unless it's another binomial that matches it perfectly. All right, number 5 looks a little bit different right now. How could I change this so that these are both written as fractions? Natalie?
Put that one on the center over 1.
Put the second polynomial, second piece, over a 1. So now they're both fractions. We've got 2 numerators and 2 denominators. Now that we've got them both written as fractions and I'm multiplying them together, what do I need to do before I can start simplifying? Factor. Will my first numerator factor? No, so what does it need? Parentheses. What method do I need to factor my second numerator? The X method. But this ought to look familiar We just factored this on the last one. What did it factor into? X minus 4, x plus 3. It's that same exact polynomial that we factored at the beginning last problem. We move on to the denominator. Jamal, what's the first thing I could factor from my denominator? An x. So I'm going to write it over here for now because this denominator takes a couple steps. When I factor out just an x, Jamal, what's left in parentheses?
-25.
We will have a minus 25. There's something that belongs in front of it. X or x squared? X squared. We had 3 and we only took 1 out. So there's an x squared left. But we can factor that more. So I know I'm going to have an x. Jalen, how am I going to continue factoring what's left here other than that x out in front?
Square root, right?
Square root. So what's going in my parentheses over here?
X minus 5.
And?
X minus 5. X plus 5.
Good. X minus 5 and x plus 5. Do I need to worry about factoring a 1? No. Do we have questions about the factoring step? We're ready to start simplifying. Ryan, what's something that can simplify? Good. X minus 5s can cancel out. Anything else? No. So, Kion, how do I write my answer?
So we start from the top.
Yep.
A squared is
Good. What about the bottom?
X. X plus 5.
Then what?
X plus 5.
Good. Will anything else here cancel out or reduce?
No.
No. So that is it. That's the end of it. Kian. Moving on to number 6. First thing that we could do to simplify this is to square our first fraction. What does it mean to square something? Ryan? Good. So if we're squaring it, we're multiplying the same number twice. So if I'm taking negative 4/3 squared, that's negative 4/3 times negative 4/3. Negative 4 times negative 4 gives me what? 16. 3 times 3. So that whole first fraction I've simplified now, but I'm still multiplying that to what? 15 over 16. Questions about that first step? Okay. Now we can simplify. Deja, what's something that'll simplify here? 9 and 15. What does the 9 become? 3 and the 15. Good. All right, what's something else that can simplify? What happens to them? They get turned into 1s. So now, across the top, we have 1 times 5. 5 over 3 times 1. Can that reduce more? No. Do not worry about putting these into mixed numbers. Just leave them as improper fractions. Number 7. Again, we have something being squared. Is the negative getting squared? How do you know that the negative is not getting squared? It's not in the parentheses. So the negative is separate from what's getting squared. We're going to have a negative sign, and then we could write 6n over 7m cubed twice. Now, this is not the only way to approach this problem, but this is how we've been doing these. Is there anything that we're going to be able to cancel out? No. Okay, the 6's cannot reduce with the 7's. The n's cannot reduce with the m's. So we are going to have to just multiply through. The negative's going to stay out in front. In my numerator, I'm going to have 6 times 6, 36. N times n, n squared. In my denominator, 7 times 7, 49. M cubed times m cubed. So I've heard to the 6th or to the 9th. 6th, when we multiply the same base, what do we do with their exponents? Add them. So 3 plus 3 gives me m to the 6th. Now here at the end, is there anything I can reduce or cancel? Still no. If I couldn't reduce anything in the beginning, I probably can't reduce anything at the end. Make sure you're keeping in track of that negative sign that's out in front. It was not part of what was getting squared, so it stays negative. All right, number 8. What's the first thing I need to think about on number 8? Factoring. Anytime you see something that can be factored, whether it's a GCF, square roots, X method, bubbles, any type of factoring, that needs to be your first thought. Can I factor my first numerator? Is there a GCF? Can I use an X method? No, there's no way to factor that. It's a monomial, one term, cannot be factored. Just leave it alone. If you want to put parentheses around it, you can. You do not have to. What about my second numerator? Yes, I'm going to factor it with which method? The X method. What's going on top of the X? The bottom of the X. What numbers fill in my sides? Are they both going to be negative? How many negative numbers am I going to need? One negative number, one positive number. -2 and 1. I was hearing all sorts of combinations of those numbers. -2 times 1 multiplies to -2. -2 plus 1 adds to a -1. So what goes in my parentheses? X minus 2, x plus 1. In my denominator, what can I do to factor? No, these are not perfect squares. A GCF. What's my GCF of this denominator? And what's left when I factor out a 6? X minus 2 is left. Now, I did not write this over on the right side yet. Because I'm multiplying this 6 to what other number before it goes over there?
4.
The 4. And the x, but you don't really multiply by an x. So 6 times 4 gives me what? What goes next to the 24? The x. And then what is also getting multiplied down in my denominator? The x minus 2. Do we have questions about where the 24x came from? Okay, what's something that I can reduce now? What happens to the x minus 2's? They cancel out completely. What else? Okay, so the 10x to the 4th and the 24x. Which part do we want to deal with first? You want to deal with your x's or your numbers? I mean, it doesn't matter to me. Somebody tell me something that'll simplify.
Probably 10 or 24.
Okay, what happens to the 10?
Subtract from 24.
No.
Oh, it's unsimplified.
Jamal said the 10 becomes a 5. What does the 24 become? A 12. We can also simplify x to the 4th and x. They are not in parentheses as part of binomials. They're on their own, so they can simplify. What are we left with? X to the 3rd on the top. To finish this, we just have to write our answer and make sure nothing else can simplify. What's going in my numerator?
5x to the 3rd.
Times x plus 1. What's going in my denominator? Anything else with the 12?
X.
No.
No. Why is there not an x by it? It canceled out with the x to the 4th in the numerator. That's how we got the x cubed. Nothing else here simplifies or cancels out, so that is our answer.